Hello, my dear friends. You're in the Military of a Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 15th of May of 2026. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the conflict on the territory of Ukraine, where the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, made a very interesting statement. Today, Zelensky reported that Russia is preparing for strikes on decision-making centers in Ukraine. Zelensky said, according to him, the targets include nearly 2,000 political centers and military installations. So this is a very important statement, and I would like to describe you what exactly Zelensky is talking about. Of course, from this perspective, from these words, we can make a conclusion that the Russians decided to attack the Verkhovna Rada, or let's say the main building of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, or to attack Zelensky personally, and probably even to attack Syrsky personally. Yes, this is exactly what the Russians are going to do. But the most important thing, what exactly the Russians are planning to achieve with these attacks and with this strike on decision-making centers. Another important statement, another important article. Today, specialists of the main intelligence directorate have obtained documents indicating Russia's preparation for new rocket drone strikes on Ukraine, specifically on decision-making centers. These include nearly 2,000 political centers and military outposts. Once again, two articles on the same matter. So what exactly is happening? You know that every time when Russians attack the territory of Ukraine with missiles, we can see the following picture. The president of Ukraine, Zelensky, leaves the territory of Ukraine probably 5 hours before the Russians attack the territory of Ukraine. And the last time it happened several days ago during the biggest Russian attack since the beginning of the special military operation that took place between the 13th and the 14th of May of 2026. And during this period of time, the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, was forced to leave the territory of Ukraine, and he moved to Romania, where he was waiting when the Russians finish their attack. So with this statement that the Russians are planning to attack not just the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, and not just his position, but the Russians are planning to attack the entire inner circle of Ukraine, inner circle of Zelensky, and inner political circle of Ukraine. This means that the Russians are trying to make the situation when every single political person of Ukraine would be forced to withdraw Ukraine, leave Ukraine in direction of Poland, in the direction of Romania, in the direction of the United States of America. It doesn't matter. The most important thing from the Russian side is to force politicals of Ukraine to leave Ukraine itself. So for a day, for 2 days during the massive attacks. And this is a very interesting situation, because if it happens, if, for example, if the head of the office of the president of Ukraine leaves the territory of Ukraine, if commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Syrsky, leaves Ukraine, if the head of the general staff of Ukraine leaves Ukraine, this will create a political buffer on the territory of Ukraine. So there would be population, there would be a state of Ukraine, but without the head of Ukraine. I'm talking about all these people we've just discussed. And of course, this can lead to the situation when the Russians would try, as a result of some special certain operation, to fill the gap, or at least not to allow these people to return back to Ukraine. So this is a very interesting statement, very interesting situation that is currently developing on the territory of Ukraine, and most likely we will see significant consequences. Another important statement made by the president of Ukraine. Russia is preparing an offensive from Belarus on the Chernihiv-Kyiv direction, or against one of the NATO countries. Zelensky claims that Russia is allegedly persuading Belarus to join this operation. We continue to record Russia's attempts to further draw Belarus into the war against Ukraine. We know that there have been additional contacts between the Russian side and Lukashenko. He is the president of Belarus, the purpose of which is to persuade him to join the Russia's new aggressive operations. And I would like to remind you that during the previous days we received lots of very interesting updates on this matter. The president of Belarus made lots of statements about possible mobilization, about the situation that the Belarus is preparing for war. Belarus is preparing for defense. The authorities will selectively mobilize units and prepare them for possible combat operations. So everything is possible, everything might happen during the next days and during the next stage of the special military operation. But the most important thing is this next statement that was made this time by the head of the office of the president of Ukraine, Budanov. He said that otherwise the country will simply collapse. Budanov ruled out the cancellation of forced mobilization. So now we see another process in Ukraine. The Ukrainians are intensifying the mobilization process. The sources stated that the Ukrainians created additional recruit officers through the city of Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine. And you know that since the beginning of the special military operation, for some reason, the Ukraine's authorities were trying not to use Kyiv as a recruitment source. They were trying to recruit people from different parts of Ukraine, but not from the city of Kyiv. They were trying to create a, let's say, normal life situation. The city of, yes, there was a mobilization process, but not so intensified as, for example, in the rest part of Ukraine. And now we start receiving reports that the Ukrainian authorities began building additional recruit centers on the territory of the city of Kyiv, which means that the Ukrainians are planning to intensify the mobilization process for many reasons. First of all, due to the fact that the city of Kyiv wasn't touched by the common mobilization process that was taking place on the territory of Ukraine, this means that the city of Kyiv managed to accumulate a lot of people. There are several millions of people who wasn't bothered with the mobilization process almost at all, and which means that there are probably 1.5 million of men of, let's say, military age who can be mobilized and without any problems from the Ukrainian side. And another important thing, that this intensifying process of mobilization probably is also connected with the situation that Russia is preparing an offensive from Belarus, and of course additional recruit centers on the territory of the city of Kyiv will allow Zelensky and the Ukrainians to forcibly mobilize as many as possible soldiers if Russians begin offensive operation in the direction of the city of Kyiv from the territory of the Republic of Belarus, or from the area of the Bryansk region through the city of Chernihiv, also in the direction of the city of Kyiv. And if you have lots of recruit centers, of course, you will be able to recruit a lot of soldiers within days, probably, or weeks. Another important thing, that all these statements were made by the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, after the Ukrainians attacked Russia. If you remember, during the 30th and the 14th of May of 2026, we had the biggest massive attack carried out by the Russians since the beginning of the special military operation. And this picture we have already discussed. And right after this attack happened, right after the Russians damaged and dealt significant damage to Ukraine, Zelensky later made a statement that he has instructed the armed forces of Ukraine and special services to propose options for responding to a Russian attack on Kyiv. And several hours later, we start receiving updates that the Ukrainians launched hundreds of drones deep inside of the territory of Russia, and the sources stated that there were around 250 drones involved in this massive attack. And during the night, later during the night and this morning and during the day, we were receiving lots of updates from the territory of the city of Ryazan, because this settlement was under attack. And we received lots of videos. Here we can see a Ukrainian drone that hit the building. Here we can see almost the same story. Another drone hit another building on the territory of the city of Ryazan. So it seems that dozens of drones of the armed forces of Ukraine managed to get the city. And basically all these drones were moving in the direction of the oil refinery. But these multi-story buildings were located on the roads of attack. So that is why these drones were attacking all these buildings. And during the day and during the night, we received lots of updates with fire anomalies. We can see here a huge fire broke out on the territory of the Bryansk oil refinery. So summarizing everything, we can make a conclusion, confident conclusion, that it seems that the Ryazan oil refinery was damaged, and probably significantly. And most likely, based on this situation, based on this hit, the Russians sent a message to the Ukrainian side that from now on they will not attack, let's say, locomotives or power substation through Ukraine. From now on, the Russian side would begin attacking also decision-making centers. So it seems that the Russians are tasked and think that it's time to finish the conflict, and the only way how to finish the conflict, according to the Russian understanding of the situation, is to begin attacking decision-making centers, because according to Americans, according to probably even part Europeans, according to Russians, everything is ready for a peaceful settlement of the conflict, and the only thing that doesn't allow this conflict to be settled peacefully is authorities, both the Russian and the Ukrainian authorities. The Russians don't see they don't want to resolve the conflict on the Ukrainian terms, and the Ukrainians don't want to do the same. So that is why the Russians made this decision, most likely to begin attacking decision-making centers. So this is the situation between Russia and Ukraine. Most likely in coming days, the Russians will repeat their massive attack. And at the same time, these massive attacks allows the Russians to intensify their attacks along the line of combat contact, where the Russians, for example, and by the way, during the previous 24 hours, managed to improve their positions significantly. Now let's talk about the situation on the ground. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians were bombing the city of Zaporizhzhia significantly. In this video, we can see the consequences of attack. Here we can see a black smoke over the settlement. The Russians attacked the city with aviation bomb. Furthermore, the Russians destroyed several locomotives in the area of the city by the name of Vilnyansk. The Russians tried to control the logistics between the western and the eastern bank of the river of Dnipro. And at the same time, as we can see, the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their position significantly through the eastern Zaporizhzhia direction. We haven't been receiving anything from this area for a very long period of time. Probably after the Ukrainians launched their winter counter-offensive operation through the northern Zaporizhzhia direction, we stopped receiving anything from the eastern Zaporizhzhia direction, from the river of Gaichur and so on. But today we received at least 2 updates about the situation on the ground. Pro-Russian sources published a video from the settlement by the name of Charivne, and this is the video. And here we can see how the Russians were fighting for this settlement, how the Russians were bombing positions of the armed forces of Ukraine with artillery, with aviation, with heavy tools flamethrower systems, with FPV drones, trying to reduce the settlement to ruins and trying to reduce the Ukraine's resistance in this area. And after the Russians finished all these attacks, the Russians, of course, launched infantry with the purpose to secure the settlement. And in the final part of this video, we can see at least 4 episodes of how Russians were raising their Russian flag through the entire settlement. 4 places were geolocated, and of course, based on this video, we can make a conclusion that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over this small village of Charivne. And most likely the Russians are not planning to stop, but before moving further in the western direction, first the Russians will try to finish the battle for the settlement of Gulyai-Polskaya. This is a pretty big village on the way towards the city of Orekhov. The Russians need this village with the purpose to accumulate and to concentrate their forces before moving further. Furthermore, the Russians most likely will try to finish the battle for this pocket, for this gap, and when the Russians finish maintaining the line of combat contact, they will most likely, we will start watching and witnessing the beginning of the battle for the city of Orekhov. If Orekhov falls in the Russians' hands, then most likely the situation for the city of Zaporizhzhia would become completely difficult for the armed forces of Ukraine. Additional progress on the ground was recorded also in the Vozdvizhenka direction. Here we have changes on the ground. As you can see, the changes are very big. We made these changes based on the video that was published by pro-Ukrainian sources. And here we can see how Ukrainians were FPV droning and attacking Russians through the settlement with FPV drones. So based on this video, we have adjusted the map, and these are the changes on the ground. The Russians continue advancing, and most likely in 2-3 days, the Russians will also announce complete control over the territory. And if it happens, then we can start counting days before the village of Verkhnev Tersa also falls in Russia's hands. As for the territory between the northern Zaporizhzhia direction and the northern directions, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special, just chill locations of how Russians were bombing and attacking positions of the armored forces of Ukraine, but as you can see, without significant changes on the ground. The Russians, most likely, and the Ukrainians are, there are very heavy clashes, most likely, between the Russians and the Ukrainians, but for some reason, the Russians decided to keep this situation and updates about the situation on the ground in a secret. Now let's talk about the northern directions. We have a lot of important updates. First, let's talk about the Volchansk direction. During the previous 24 hours, according to the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation, the Russians have captured the settlement of Chaikivka, and based on the report that was published both by the Ministry of Defense and the Group of Forces North, we have adjusted the map. Now we see that the Ukrainians are trying to save control over the villages of Volochovka and Kyiv. These are two small villages, but with small farms, with farms, with some forest. So there are lots of positions where the Ukrainians can keep their forces, and the Russians, as you can see, due to the fact that the Russians have right now at least two settlements to the west and to the east of these two villages on the Ukrainian side of the river of Volcha. Now most likely the Russians will begin their major offensive operation in this direction with the purpose to encircle the Ukrainians in these two villages, to take them in cauldron, and then to force the Ukrainians to fall back, if they're able, of course, if they will be able by this time to fall back from this area. The most important difficulty for the Ukrainians is the gap, the gap between the city of Belarusian and these two villages. As you can see, there are no forests, no tree lines. If Ukrainians begin retreating from this area along this line, of course, they would be attacked by the Russia's FPV drones. Another important area is the most northeastern parts of the Kharkiv region. We're talking about this territory, and due to the fact that the Russians established physical control over the supply line between the city of Belarusian and this part of the Kharkiv region, we believe that Ukrainians will also start having some troubles and issues with logistics, which means that the Russians most likely will also use this advantageous situation with the purpose to force the Ukrainians to fall back from this area in the southern direction. Another important area is the village of Akhrimovka to the east of the settlement of Chaikivka. This village is located very far from the main logistic lines, which means that maybe even before the battle for Karayichne and Volochovka, the Russians would try to attack this village with the purpose to establish complete control over this territory. And if it happens, then the Russians would have at least two villages on the Ukrainian side of the river of Volcha, which will ease the further progress on the ground deep inside of the Kharkiv region from this area. From the other side, the Ukrainians during the previous several days also carried out a counter-offensive operation, and as a result of the Ukrainian counter-offensive operation, the armored forces of Ukraine managed to recapture at least the western part of the settlement of Otradna. This video was published today by pro-Ukrainian sources, and in this video we can see how two Ukrainian soldiers were entering this part of the settlement of Otradna, and then we can see how these two Ukrainian soldiers raised two flags. One of the flags belonged to Ukraine, and the second flag belongs to the unit that was responsible for this counter-offensive operation. So it seems that Ukrainians launched a local counter-offensive operation, and as a result of this counter-attack, the Russians were forced to fall back from this area further in the direction of the border. But saying the truth, I'm not sure whether the Ukrainians are able to hold these lines for a very long period of time, because this is the most northeastern part of the Kharkiv region with a very poor logistic, so which means that in coming days the Ukrainians may leave this territory back in the direction of the settlements of Grigorovka, and the Russians will recapture these territories back. Another important area is the most northern parts of the Sumy region. During the previous 24 hours, the Russians were attacking the settlement of Glukhov, the most important city in this area where the Ukrainians concentrate and accumulate their forces before moving and sending them further in the direction of the border, where the clashes between Russians and the Ukrainians are ongoing. And during the previous 24 hours, additional changes were recorded. As you can see, we have colored the gray zone in this area as territory under complete Russian control, based on the video that was published by pro-Ukrainian sources. And in this video we can see how Ukrainians were attacking positions of Russians in this area, which means that most likely this territory is under complete Russian control and that the Russians continue advancing further. Once again, according to the President of Ukraine Zelensky, the Russians are planning to return to the state of the beginning of the special military operation. If you remember, during 2022, the Russians managed to achieve significant results in the negotiation process, and the Ukrainians were almost ready to accept the Russia's demands and to sign everything that the Russians wanted, only in the situation when the Russian forces were around the city of Kyiv, around in several kilometers, basically inside of the Kyiv's agglomeration. Only then the Ukrainians were ready to accept everything that the Russians were demanding. So which means that the Russians most likely decided to repeat or to once again attack the city of Kyiv from the north, once again with the purpose to force the Ukrainians to accept Russia's demands. I'm not sure when exactly this offensive operation is going to start, is going to happen, but saying the truth, the Russians don't have enough of time for this. So they won't do this during the winter period of time, and they won't do this during the late autumn military campaign. So if the Kyiv's offensive operation is going to happen, obviously this is going to happen. This is going to be started probably within a month or something like this. We have covered most of the updates regarding the conflict on the territory of Ukraine. Just a few more important things. During the previous 24 hours, a prisoner exchange process took place. According to the formula 205 for 205. We have lots of pictures on this matter, but there is a very important detail about the situation. If you remember, before the beginning of May's holidays, the parties agreed to have the exchange process according to formula 1,000 for 1,000, but it seems that something went wrong, and as of the end of the 15th of May of 2026, the parties exchanged just 200 according to formula 205 to 205, which means that either we won't see exchange process and probably somebody quit the deal, or the exchange process would be prolonged during these days, and every single day we will see more and more exchanges between Russians and the Ukrainians. Now we have covered almost everything about the conflict in Ukraine, and now let's talk about the conflict in the Middle East, about China-US relations. The United States of America doesn't rule out the possibility of resuming the military operation on the territory of the Middle East. At least this was stated by the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump. First, he said that according to information we have, according to the President of the United States of America, Trump may order new strikes on Iran immediately after returning from China. The United States has already notified Israel of this possibility. The oil prices are very high, and of course all these statements are doing all these prices even higher. The most important thing is that the President of the United States of America received approval, or he agreed with the President of China that the Chinese will not sell weapons to Iran, and of course, if it, at least the primary, maybe they will do this, but using third countries, everything is possible. But of course, if China doesn't support Iran in possible next conflict, most likely the Iranians will suffer huge problems with this. Now we need to wait and see what is going to happen next, but most likely when oil markets close, most likely we'll see something, and probably during these weekends, and there are very high chances, more precisely, that during the upcoming weekend, the United States of America will resume its military operation against Iran. And that's it for today. The Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye-bye.